Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our UBC campus final for Map the System 2022. Thanks for joining us today in what is sure to be an exciting round of presentations from our two teams here. My name is Ryan, and I'll be one of your hosts tonight. I work as a co-op student here at the Center for Community Engaged Learning. Our center connects students and faculty with communities to work on issues that impact society today. We work with faculty to embed community engagement into courses, and we also offer a suite of programming that is open to students from all disciplines, such as our social impact labs, days of service, and a range of grants. One of those opportunities is Map the System, which serves as a platform for students to bring interdisciplinary perspectives into research that tackles complex societal challenges. I'm very excited, as I'm sure most of you are, to see what's in store today. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Halkomelem-speaking Musqueam First Nation, upon which this university stands. As Map the System is a global competition that examines complex social and environmental issues worldwide, it's important to reflect on both the historical and present-day stewards of the land we research, learn on, and play on. I invite you to reflect on your own relationships to the lands that you reside on or may research about. To facilitate this process, something that's helped me in my own learning, being an uninvited visitor on these lands from Singapore and Pakistan, is the resource nativelands.ca, which can help you better identify the indigenous stewards of the lands you're on, the languages they speak, and their treaty history or lack thereof. Now, for those of you who might be unfamiliar, Map the System is a global competition that challenges students to think differently about social or environmental change. It attempts to change the conversation in social impact education by asking participants to focus on understanding the complexity of social or environmental issues and their existing solutions. In the program, students research a social or environmental problem that they're passionate about. In doing so, they gain skills in systems thinking to understand and present ways to address their problem of focus. CCEL, the Center for Community Engaged Learning, has had an extensive history with running Map the System for the last few years, with a legacy of strong student submissions. In fact, last year, our team representing UBC went on to win the global competition in Oxford, and they're joining us here today. Now, it's no easy feat to take part in a competition like this. Unlike other competitions, such as a hackathon, these materials do not attempt to propose a single solution to their issue of focus. Rather, the teams seek to understand their issue's history, context, and solutions landscape. This is exactly what our two teams gathered here today have been diligently putting time and effort in these last few months in preparation for today's final. As a final product of their research, the teams have submitted a written report, a visual map, and a bibliography on the complexities of their issue, in addition to the presentations that they'll provide for us today. Amid a full term of uncertainty, our teams have been hard at work gathering research, refining topics and issues, and collaborating on top of their academic, extracurricular, and social commitments. I personally, being an MTS educator for the first time, am very proud of the commitment and level of work submitted by both our teams here. In today's presentation, we will be hearing about structural barriers to climate action in higher education, followed by pediatric vaccine hesitancy in BC. Teams will have 10 minutes to present their work, followed by 10 minutes of Q&A with our panel of judges. Speaking of our judges, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to some of our guests today on the judges panel, as well as our guest speaker tonight. Chairing the panel today is our center's very own Associate Director, Yusuf Alam. He plays a leading role in equipping movements to address local and global challenges through comprehensive and intersectional approaches. Working in service to shared learning and social impact, he drives partnership development for the center and ensures stakeholder perspectives inform both the existing work and new priority initiatives. Yusuf holds a degree in biogeography from Simon Fraser University and environmental security from the United Nations University for Peace. Also joining us from our center is Dr. Shadi Merabi. Shadi is a community engaged learning officer at the Center for Community Engaged Learning. She works closely with a variety of stakeholders, such as UBC community partners, faculty, students, and other UBC staff members to design and develop tools and strategies that establish best practices for integrating CEL approaches into initiatives and courses. With a PhD in educational leadership, Shadi is interested in developing leadership strategies to help community engaged learning programs at UBC be more accessible and inclusive. Professor Mary Nightbird joins us today from the School of Social Work. She joined the school in 2018, bringing with her years of experience as a social worker and counselor in both mainstream and Indigenous programs. She teaches practice-based and Indigenous-focused courses in the Bachelor's of Social Work and Master's of Social Work programs. Her recent branching out in her career to academia is propelled by her desire to create and nourish pathways for the strength, resiliency, and wisdom of Indigenous peoples and the truth of their lives to be seen and upheld. Marie is of Saltok, Seal, and Ukrainian ancestry from Treaty 4. She has been a grateful visitor on Coast Salish territories her entire life and enjoys opportunities to participate in the range of initiatives students from across UBC work hard in. We're also joined today by Kathy Zhu, a first-year UBC nursing student with a strong interest in bridging social and health inequities through an intersectional trauma-informed lens. Prior to nursing, she completed a Bachelor of Science in Food, Nutrition, and Health, also at UBC. Kathy and her team previously brought home UBC's first Global Map the System win as first place with their research topic, Unique Get-Together Society and Urban Indigenous Food Insecurity in British Columbia. And rounding off the panel is Linda Nolan, who leads the UBC Sustainability Initiative as Senior Director. She has over 25 years of experience in sustainability as a public interest environmental lawyer and NGO leader. Since joining UBC in 2020, Linda has co-led the development of the Sustainability Hub strategic plan, instituted the Climate Justice webinar series, and started a new program to convene and coordinate work on implementing the UBC Climate Emergency Task Force report. Linda is also an adjunct professor at the Allard School of Law, where she co-teaches an environmental law workshop. And she has degrees in English literature, law, and international law. Now, without further ado, let's get started on our first team presentation, which will be Structural Barriers to Climate Action in Higher Education, an institutional example of UBC.
All right, hello and welcome everyone to our presentation on the structural barriers to climate action in higher education with the case study of UBC. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that our research was conducted and synthesized on UBC's Point Grey campus, which sits on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Halkominam-speaking Musqueam people, on whose land we all live, work, and play. Our topic doesn't need too much introduction, given the growing seriousness of the climate crisis in recent years. However, the IPCC report of April 4th really drives the issue home by stating, without immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees is beyond reach. To do our part to address this issue, we chose to focus on the extent to which higher education institutions can prioritize climate policy over economic gain and institutional prestige. This is what we'll be discussing in our presentation today, but to begin with, a little bit of context for UBC's climate action. The key stakeholders at UBC are the staff, students, faculty, and alumni of the institution, as well as the residents of UBC's Point Grey and the Musqueam First Nation. A few key terms that need to be understood going forward are decoupling, which is the effort to reduce the amount of carbon emissions required to grow the economy. The growth imperative, which is the structural economic forces inherent to competition under capitalism that make expansion necessary for survival. And finally, degrowth, which is a rejection of the growth imperative, which as a democratic scaling back of economic activity in order to prioritize other metrics of well-being. UBC's most recent climate policy is the Climate Action Policy 2030, which focuses on priorities like decreased and zero emission buildings, increased use of electric vehicles on the campus, the creation of an internal carbon price, the SkyTrain to the campus and other sustainable commuting options, a decrease in air travel for faculty and staff, an increase in climate-friendly foods on campus, and a decrease of waste, as well as a communications and engagement strategy to inform students of this issue.
So now on to research methods. So first we did a policy and literature review, stakeholder interviews, and also a student survey. So most of our interviews show that UBC is trying to become a sustainable university. However, the respondents also said that there are more pressing priorities, such as profit and reputation. So a quote is, UBC works harder than other universities I've visited, but they are a far cry from making climate change their actual priority. Another important point was made that UBC suffers from bureaucratic inertia. As such, policy change is made more difficult and slower. The final recurring comment is about growth. Many respondents said that they had never seen a campus not under construction. So we also have a student survey where we had responses from both international and domestic students. It should be noted that all of the people that responded did so on a voluntary basis, so the sample might be a bit biased towards people who are interested in sustainability issues. More than half of our respondents had actually not taken a sustainability course at UBC. However, almost all of them, apart from 8%, said that they had become more aware of sustainability issues during their time here. So we also asked, to what extent do you think UBC is a sustainable university? We had most people say 3 out of 5, 5 being the highest, 0 being the lowest. And also asking people if or if not they would use sustainability in future and what they had learned here. Most of them responded, yes, they would, but not actually a lot had taken classes here, as I mentioned before. So overall, our research helped us determine the complex dynamics around UBC and its climate change policies. Thank you.
So here's our systems map, which we built after the research that really allowed us to build the findings that we're going to discuss later. But the main idea here is that within the bubble, we've tried to bound the system of UBC and the climate at UBC. And so then as two sort of inputs and outputs, we have the growth imperative on the one hand, and then climate change as an output. And with this in mind, what we can do is work to interpret the stuff inside the map to understand how this idea of the growth imperative might drive sort of counterproductive actions within the system. So we can take the example, I'm not sure how well you guys can see, but number of students, for example, when there's the imperative there present to always constantly expand, you have number of students, which positively reinforces physical expansion as it does land use change, deforestation, et cetera, which all feeds back towards campus emissions. And so you have the growth imperative through the system to the output of climate change. Of course, there's also some opportunities in the map. Two of them, we have academics who study climate change as well as mandatory climate education. We saw in the survey before that people did learn more about sustainability during their time at UBC. So that's something that we can leverage. And what this can do is spark a positive feedback loop where we have more institutional climate policy, better attitudes, and more information around climate change, which can reduce on-campus emissions. Of course, as with opportunities, there are also traps to be aware of in the system. The important one here is that the same action, which is more climate research, can also have sort of a counterproductive effect when we think about the motivation behind what's being done. So if, for example, climate research is being pursued with this growth imperative in mind and is only a means to sort of boost, the institution's ranking and enrollment, we can see how climate research then is something that can be pumped into marketing, which can be used to boost the international status, to grow again, to have more students, which has the same feedback loop again on campus emissions.
All right, moving on to the solutions landscape. What solutions already exist? We've got institutional policy like the CAP 2030. We've also got the educational model, so that's courses on sustainability. You've got the idea of hiring faculty specialized in sustainability and researchers in sustainability. You've also got the idea of capping university admissions, which was implemented in the UK during the COVID crisis, which could also be a solution. And then you've got a lot of literature on degrowth and decoupling, which can be applied. Moving on to our gaps and levers, we've got a first gap, which is that UBC must adhere to global higher education standards in order to retain and recruit students. And as a lever, as a solution, we could potentially cap student admissions, which would potentially increase prestige and elitism as well. And then you've also got the possibility to change the function of buildings so that they could be multi-use. On our second gap, we've also got the fact that students actually want to know more about climate action and sustainability, and they want more resources. We've got lots of levers here, including making courses on sustainability mandatory, creating and disseminating more accessible knowledge for all, and hiring and training professors in all disciplines in sustainability, which could have long-term positive impacts.
Moving on to our third gap, we found that UBC actually doesn't account for their negative externalities on the climate in their budget. So a lever for this would be that UBC could develop an amenity pricing system to financially account for the externalities of land development. So this would mean like pricing a tree, for instance, to account for the loss of carbon sequestration that would occur when land use is changed. Our fourth and final gap is that UBC, as many other institutions, suffers from bureaucratic inertia and path dependence. Policy implementation can be slow, and the revenue model is dependent on growth. So a lever for this could be to reframe the climate crisis as a public health crisis in order to expedite climate action. We saw that throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the framing of a public health crisis increased rapid change. And then moreover, incorporating degrowth or limits on growth throughout UBC's policy would be really critical for the institution in achieving its climate goals. So overall, our project found 5 key insights. First, that barriers remain to implementing system level climate action. Next, the university's emphasis on revenue encourages continuous growth, which directly conflicts with climate action. In order to achieve deep level growth, therefore, climate solutions, students in all departments must be given a climate conscious education, and faculty must be encouraged to conduct research relevant to climate issues. Moreover, to combat the climate crisis, UBC must be prepared to significantly lower growth, which could mean forgoing revenue. But altering its approach to revenue and altering its approach to the growth imperative, UBC can actually leverage its status as a leader in higher education in order to spark widespread systems change throughout the world and throughout other institutions. So overall, to what extent can higher education institutions prioritize climate policy over economic gain and institutional prestige? Well, UBC has made it clear that climate action is a priority. Path dependence on international prestige and growth mean that its climate actions operate under and reinforce an inherently climate destructive system. Thank you.
Now we'll have 10 minutes for any question and answers from the judges.
I really liked reading about your growth imperative section. I don't have any background in that, so that was very interesting. I liked I read it in, but just one question I had was one of your, so you proposed increasing research in educated minds as a solution to raising awareness and kind of gaining momentum for that problem. On the other hand, another solution I proposed is capping university admissions. So just out of curiosity, has your team taken into account environmental, race, and intersectionality? Just knowing that, you know, our broader system is Eurocentric, and the system does profit off oppressing Indigenous, Black people of color, who historically has, you know, been the ones at the forefront of protecting our lands. I'm just wondering, like, how do you plan on combating capping emissions and just in general, what has your research shown?
Well, in part of our report, we didn't mention this in the presentation. I think we did discuss how obviously actually capping growth and emissions could potentially cause issues with equality and diversity, because obviously we know that like that could mean that higher income students would be proportionally let into the university more. So that's definitely something that we mentioned and we considered throughout our research. And we also discussed with all of our interviewees the institution's approach to indigeneity and the intersectionality of Indigenous climate action, because of course, there are so many parts of the issue to consider with that as well.
I would just also say that the capping of university admissions has really only been carried out in the UK, so there's very little research on like how changing that might impact different groups. Of course, you know, like you said, there's a history of it, so it would certainly be something to be aware of, but the actual research on it is not super well developed at the moment.
Yes, great. Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. I have a question about your methodology. So you referred to both a student survey and interviews, but I couldn't find details about how many people you surveyed, who you interviewed, list of interviewees, how many faculty, how many staff, how many people in the administration.
So the reason there wasn't a list of interviewees is because we offered an anonymity to everyone that we interviewed, so as not to put anyone in an uncomfortable position. So that would be why you weren't given a list of interviewees to begin with.
But we interviewed 12 people and our survey was of 45 students.
Not
Yes.
as large as we would have
Um,
liked it to be.
And the
still
mix was, we had faculty, students, and one community member was our interview.
As well as an alumni,
Alum.
alumnus, and the staff member as well. I
Yeah.
believe.
Sure.
Thank you so much. It was a great presentation, very important topic. I appreciate the way that you see UBC as a system. My question to you will be, with seeing UBC as a system, what do you think you missed here in your analysis?
Well, I think you can always have more detail. As we didn't, obviously, we had with limited time and reach, weren't able to interview as many people as we would have liked to, or have the depth of the survey results that would have been completely ideal. So I think we missed the viewpoints of all the people that we weren't able to talk to. I think within that, we tried our best to kind of have, not interdisciplinary is the wrong word, but look at kind of economic interactions and social interactions. The one thing I think we might have missed is that we were looking at mostly at on-campus emissions, but in the scheme of things, I think UBC's role is much larger than that. I think what UBC can really do to help work on climate change globally is not, frankly, reducing its own emissions. It's because the university, the thing that you can leverage as a university is your production of knowledge. And that has impacts worldwide. I mean, UBC is a world-renowned institution that publishes research that's read everywhere. The emissions that this campus produces are large in the scheme of things, are a fraction of it. So I think we missed the way that UBC's sort of knowledge production and dissemination is situated within the global, higher education space.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's a great answer. I think what we miss, this is my opinion, is a more macro level analysis, which shows how UBC interact with different players and actors in a larger system.
Yeah.
So UBC can be a system, but within another system, which is a larger system. So what I'm not seeing in analysis is how UBC is actually interacting with those different players, like federal governments,
Right.
city,
Totally.
local communities, like different players that could have a role here.
I think, yeah, that's our focus. Because we had to figure out a way to bound it somewhere. And so I think what we ended up focusing on was kind of decision-making in internal to UBC. Of course, that's influenced by all these other actors and has influences on all these other actors. So it would have been great to include that as well.
And I have to say that our first whiteboard drawing definitely had all of those connections, and we went, whoa, we gotta narrow this down a little bit, and also
Right.
just to be able to have the connections to interview people and stuff like that, going up to a federal level and became a little bit more complicated. But you're certainly right that there's external factors at play.
Slightly related
Yeah.
to that, to the kind of the balance of it. I think just zeroing in, I think you've done some really wonderful research. It's coming across clearly. You've got, I think, what I admire right up the top is that you ask really frank questions of the university that honestly aren't, I don't know if people don't feel welcome or there's not the right space to put them out there, but, you know, around the status draft, around the Medicare pricing system and whatnot. So I'm actually a little bit interested in the Medicare pricing system piece, but maybe this is where it ties a little bit to what Shadi was just mentioning. As a potential solution, but as something that's actually real and happening day by day in terms of loss of ecosystem, you know, the transformation of the land. What would you say would be a good example, a place to look locally or globally for how this works? I've seen this at the national level, but is there a national model that you would point to, or is there a localized model that you think might be appropriate for examples?
I'll go after.
So there's like a number of economic models that do amenity pricing, and it depends like on the interest rate and like a number of other factors. But there do exist models. I think it's up to like UBC, the government, or whatever interest stakeholder it is to decide which model they want to pick. Because they are out there, and like a lot of it is still theory based pretty much now. But the models are pretty like, I think, reliable.
Have you seen any in action in Canada or on campus?
I don't think so.
No. And the thing that I think we are also hoping to convey is that these sorts of systems are like an absolutely necessary interim step. But the solution is not just to marketize the environment and make it more expensive to destroy something, because you know, destruction of the environment shouldn't be a privilege reserved for those with the most money. So that's something that we can do to disincentivize it, but we really need to move beyond that at some point.
Maybe just to add, I think there are models, but with other resources, not so much like trees and whatever we have on campus here. Like for fish or animals, it is more here today, but not so much non the thing for.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question. If there's any.
Go ahead. So you have another bit. It's more of a curiosity. I think you mentioned that 80% of people said they learned something here. And you asked how many people took the course. Did you ask other avenues that they learned, that they gained this information while they were here? Because I think learning can happen in a lot of different ways. And I don't recall hearing that or reading it.
Yeah, that was part of our survey as well. We asked them how they learned. And courses, I think, was like the number 2 or number 3 most popular answer, but the largest part was definitely friends. We also gave them as an option community events, the media, and all of that. So for sure, that was something that we included. And courses did rank pretty highly, but it was definitely the environment and the people that you interact with on campus that most students found to be the place where they learned the most. For sure.
Educational community versus
Exactly.
the classroom, the formal.
Exactly.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Another round of applause. Thank you to our first team for that round of presentation. I think that was a really informative look on the really important and pressing issue of our day. I gained a lot more awareness of how higher education plays an integral role in climate action. Our next presentation is on pediatric vaccine hesitancy in BC.
All right, hello. So my name is Rachel and this is Nima. On behalf of our team who are currently writing their final exams right now, we will be presenting on pediatric COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy here in British Columbia. And before we start, we'd like to acknowledge the lands upon which we are gathered here today, which are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation. And so to those land keepers who have looked over this land for so long, we give our thanks. And so to start off, what is vaccine hesitancy? Vaccine hesitancy refers to the delay in acceptance or the delay in refusal despite available vaccination services. So vaccine hesitancy involves a complex gradient that includes a range of individual attitudes from eager to accept vaccination to waiting and seeing to indecision and then complete refusal. And I'd like to note our positionality and motivation and that we're not here to promote either end of the spectrum, but merely to map out the underlying factors that contribute to an individual's position along the spectrum and what might push a parent towards one end of the spectrum versus the other.
So as you might expect, the impacts of pediatric COVID-19 infections go far beyond the short-term clinical consequences associated with COVID itself. These figures are meant to demonstrate that vaccine hesitancy stands to be a long-term problem in BC. The main issue with lack of vaccine coverage is that herd immunity is compromised. This allows for a high rate of infections to spread throughout the community and more routinely spread throughout the community, which has socioeconomic and health-related consequences. Health impacts from increased spread of COVID-19 through pediatric populations impacts our most clinical vulnerable populations as well. And the socioeconomic effects as a result of low herd immunity will be felt both in the short and long term, for example, through school and business closures. So it's evident that lower pediatric COVID-19 vaccination rates have long-term disproportionate impacts, and the current system is relatively ineffective at increasing pediatric vaccine rates. Therefore, for the purposes of this project, we've decided to focus on why the current system is unsuccessful in increasing pediatric COVID-19 vaccine coverage in British Columbia.
So for our project, we partnered with UBC's Vaccine Literacy Club, and with them we conducted surveys on vaccine attitudes, where we collected 122 responses, as well as conducted a range of interviews with either industry experts or with parents from around the Lower Mainland. And then lastly, we conducted our own extensive literature and media trends review. And so some of the key things we pulled out from this research was that there are 5 key assessments, or the 5 C's, that contribute to parents' vaccine attitude. So the first is confidence, which refers to their level of trust in the vaccine itself and the producers of that vaccine. And second is complacency. So if the risk of COVID-19 is deemed low for their child, vaccines might seem unnecessary. And also we have convenience of getting the vaccine itself, and collective responsibility, which refers to the extent to which a parent feels responsible for them and their child to contribute towards herd immunity by getting vaccinated themselves. And then lastly, we have calculation, which refers to your risk-benefit analysis on the risk of contracting COVID-19 infection versus the risk of any side effects of vaccination. And what we found with regards to pediatric vaccine hesitancy was that assessments of confidence and complacency were key in affecting a parent's position along the hesitancy spectrum. And so who affects vaccine choice? We identified key stakeholders to be the social groups a parent is involved in, their school communities, and their family doctor or healthcare practitioners, as well as public health institutions and government. And ultimately what we found was that the level of influence these stakeholders have was really dependent upon trust. And so really throughout our research, we found that time and time again, it really boiled down to the level of trust that parents placed in different stakeholders that affected their position on vaccination. And so if a parent doesn't trust a stakeholder, then their efforts to affect their vaccine attitude will be neglected, or sometimes it can even be vilified. And trust can also contribute to the polarization of the different ends of the hesitancy spectrum between refusers and acceptors, since a parent is more likely to place their trust in a stakeholder that reaffirms their position along the hesitancy spectrum, so further contributing to polarization. And so underlying this, we identified some key sociocultural, economic, and environmental determinants of trust itself. And so one of those was your political position and a history of marginalization, particularly in healthcare, since these can contribute to a history of negative past experiences and discrimination that can reinforce mistrust in government institutions. Also, socioeconomic status and parents' level of education and ethnicity can all intersect to affect their level of health literacy, as well as the social groups they're involved in. And this ultimately culminates to affect who parents are going to turn to for advice and who they're going to accept advice from, and where they place their trust and credibility.
So as demonstrated by this map, all stakeholders are engaged in a proverbial battle for the stakeholder trust, either explicitly or implicitly. Furthermore, the trust of parents themselves impacts the behavior of ancillary stakeholders, like schools and businesses, as demonstrated by the two-way arrows. So now moving on to the solution landscape. So the global and national scope of solutions for this topic is incredibly diverse, ranging from draconian top-down approaches to local community-based approaches. The most common areas of intervention include logistical interventions, educational interventions, and public messaging-based interventions. So we identified some key characteristics that separate effective interventions from less effective ones, at least when we're looking in a BC-based context. Firstly, improving vaccine access is incredibly effective in places that have taken intentional, targeted efforts to do so. Per our survey, 17% of British Columbians still express logistical difficulties when it comes to accessing vaccinations, which is a major barrier. Secondly, demonstrating competency regarding COVID-19 is another effective solution. Parents are more likely to trust figures like the PHO who have demonstrated the ability to reduce risk in the past. And thirdly, in BC, effective solutions like IMPACT have involved direct community involvement. Vaccine hesitant parents are not a monolithic group. So having efforts that acknowledge that diversity of position is crucial to successfully addressing the gaps in the system. So speaking of the gaps in the system, we found that there were 4 key gaps in the current system which enable vaccine hesitancy amongst BC parents. Furthermore, a lack of trust sits at the center of all these gaps, and all these gaps perpetrate each other in one way or another. So moving into the discussion of the gaps, the first gap we identified is that a poor patient-provider relationship which stems from historical inequities, discrimination within medicine, and a lack of equitable healthcare provider access negatively affects impressions of vaccines. To address this, providers must recognize that patient mistrust exacerbates vaccine hesitancy. Furthermore, providers and the government should acknowledge that efforts to address diversity and inclusion within healthcare will have a direct impact on vaccine uptake through improving public trust and access. Secondly, in BC, public messaging from the PHO lacks public input and is focused heavily on broader statistics, not focusing on the collective herd immunity benefits of vaccination. Because of the individualism around vaccine communication, parents feel as if they need to do their own research on whether the vaccine is right for their child specifically. Hence, pointing at broad population-based metrics about vaccine safety doesn't accomplish what we think it does. Thirdly, groups within government and science demonstrate a dismissive set of mental models towards the public, believing that the public is stubborn and misinformed. These mental models are quite distant from the reality of the situation, demonstrating the bounded rationality that these stakeholders exhibit, owing to their lack of familiarity with the parts of the system that parents interact with, as we've discussed earlier. To address this, science and government need to reevaluate their positionality in mental models, leveraging that into interventions which democratize science effectively. And our last gap is that the relationship between the government, who in BC is viewed as the primary advocate for vaccination per our survey, and vaccine producers, who are viewed as having a profit motive, ferments mistrust in government positionality and messaging. Governments and researchers should recognize that they have the choice to foster transparent relationships with vaccine producers and implement appropriate self-regulative interventions which delineate these relationships effectively.
So overall, this project allowed us to look at the set of complex interactions that contribute to vaccine hesitancy. And we'd like to acknowledge the limitations of our data collection in that they're both limited in both their distribution and the scope of the questions we asked. But we still were able to challenge some of the assumptions that we had going into this project. One of them being that this issue was specific to this pandemic and because of the rapid production of these new vaccines, when really we found this is a long-standing issue that is rooted in historical context and a range of past experiences with healthcare in general. Another assumption we had was that misinformation was the key driver of hesitancy. And while we found that it does contribute, we found that trust was really at the center of this issue. And lastly, we realized we were naive to think that most parents should blindly trust public health recommendations for their child. And this project really forced us, being science students, to kind of reevaluate our own mental models and perhaps false ideals of scientism that we didn't realize we had. And so given this, we identified 2 main calls to action. The first being that we need to acknowledge and break down these mental models that contribute to the polarization of this spectrum. We need to understand that vaccine hesitancy is a spectrum, and a parent who is vaccine hesitant should by no means be labeled an anti-vaxxer, as this only further contributes to that polarization. Secondly, we should look to design implementations that prioritize rebuilding public trust. So those working in public health need to recognize their role in the public trust deficit and act to earn back and maintain public trust. And so overall, we realized that these challenges are not just limited to vaccine hesitancy, but are a part of the greater problem of mistrust in healthcare and in contested science in general. And so we realized that these challenges are key challenges faced by public health institutions as they make that transition going from scientific study into policy and into practice.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for that. Again, we'll have 10 minutes for questions from the judging panel. Go ahead.
I think we're trying to digest.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Quick turn.
I'll start off with, okay. I don't have any, I think, huge overarching question to put in front of you, but I just have to thank you for any significant amount of research and time that you put into preparing yourself. It's clear that you did research-wise, but also presentation-wise. So thanks for that. I noticed in the written, and I wasn't sure if you'd speak a little bit more to it in this part of the presentation. There was a mention of like the role that the relationship and the understanding, or the kind of how do you say, the perception of what big pharma is in this equation. And then I didn't hear too much more about it today. So I guess I had some questions just in the back of the line about like, how do you get your head around, or where within this system analysis could you explain what the role, or what the actual, the difference between perceived and actual heft, or role or influence that big pharma has on this conversation? What do you think in terms of where that would fit into your research?
Sure. So that's an incredibly, that's a complex question, and in the interest of being humble, it's something that we don't entirely know, but I'll give my best shot at answering it. So we feel that the difference from what is perceived and what is actual is what information is made available to the public. If the public doesn't know what's going on, if that veil is shrouded between what's going on between lobbyists and the government and scientists and researchers, they're only left to assume what is there. And when they're left to assume what is there, they're left to assume that vaccine producers are motivated by profit. I mean, our survey, and again, our survey, I want to reiterate, it's limited, it's not perfect, it's not scientific results. But in our survey, we did find that 28% of our respondents did not believe that the vaccine producers were interested in their well-being, which is, to me, a shockingly high number. So that's something that we tried to focus on here with the idea of big pharma making backroom deals and the shrouded veil, with the government being obligated to kind of remove that veil, kind of expose what's going on, and allow the public to make their own impressions about what is actually happening behind the scenes. So, but that is a very difficult question. I don't know if Rachel, you want to add.
Yeah, I remember when I was going through all of our surveys and kind of looking, because we just asked a couple of our questions were just open-ended, and you could put in what you, and obviously some people were very opinionated on their opinions of big pharma. But one thing that I remember, a couple of quotes that stood out to me, was parents saying that, you know, they don't know everything about the safety and the long-term impacts of this vaccine. And they're like, and that's okay. But like, we just want to know what you know and don't know. So that's why we tried to emphasize just the need for transparency from these big pharma companies, because obviously, ideally, we want to delineate the relationships between government and big pharma, but you can't, and define those relationships. We can't entirely do that. So really, the call that we saw in a lot of our survey responses was transparency. Like, we just want to know what you do and don't know.
Also complimenting on the amount of people you interviewed and surveyed. I was very impressed. And out of curiosity, are you the person that works in the clinic?
In the VLC, in the Vaccine Literacy Club? No, that's one of our partners. Her name is Emilie. Regrettably, she has an exam right now.
Right.
So we wish her the best of luck writing it, but she couldn't be here today, so it's us presenting. But yeah, she helped us. I mean, her club was founded when vaccines first started being produced, and they have an incredible number of resources and connections at BC Children's, with Vancouver Coastal Health, and with the First Nations Health Authority, as far as interviewing people and interviewing researchers, people on the ground with this issue. So that helped us a lot with kind of laying the groundwork for this issue. Yes.
So I have two questions. One, I was curious, I don't think any of you identified if you were vaccinated in the opening when you positioned yourself. And I thought, oh, okay. I just wondered if you thought about that, or if that was.
That's something that we, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's actually interesting. Yeah, I guess that is a key piece to start, but we just, kind of wanted to identify that, because obviously this is a controversial issue. So it's kind of hard to position ourselves in a way that's neutral.
Yeah, in case anyone here isn't vaccinated, our presentation was not intended, like I said, to vilify anyone. We're just looking at the systems that impact it. For the record, both of us are vaccinated, but that doesn't mean we're not attempting to advocate explicitly and push for that. We're just trying to look at take a systems view of this issue. Yes.
And my question, I think in the written report towards the end, it was stated to earn and maintain the trust is critical. And it also mentioned in the written report the racism that's existed within Indigenous communities. So I wonder if you have an example based upon your experience or just what you think, what could be done here at the university to kind of work towards building the trust.
One thing we found, we actually we came across a book that was on vaccine hesitancy, and we each kind of did like a journal club and each looked at chapters of it. And one of the things they talked about specifically with regards to that is the 3 kind of main intervention points was like a patient and their practitioner relationship was one place to intervene, as well as then public health messaging. But then the other one that was key was in adding inclusion and diversity into healthcare institutions. So I think that could kind of address that. Obviously, this is a long-standing issue, and in some of like the directed studies and research I'm doing, I've done a lot of work with like cultural safety courses, and obviously there's a very long-standing history that building trust is something that is going to be years and years of doing. So I think one place to start could be adding that diversity and inclusion into healthcare and working on those patient-provider relationships to improve trust, at least within that small aspect of the healthcare system.
If I may add to that, one of the more specific things when you talk about the university doing as actually admitting more people from that background, or admitting more individuals from a First Nations background, from a marginalized background. One thing, for example, that the University of Saskatchewan has done recently, their medical college, is to make it mandatory that matriculants do take an Indigenous cultural course as a prerequisite. And prerequisites for medical school in Canada are incredibly uncommon. So that's kind of a groundbreaking type of thing that even those from an Indigenous background, also those from a non-Indigenous background, have to have some sort of formalized education or background in that area. So actually, it starts from the bottom, really, admitting people that do have a respect and acknowledgement of the cultural practices, like Rachel mentioned, is a big part of improving the system in the long term. Of course, we could have a whole nother, that could be a whole nother project all on its own, so I don't want to get too in depth into that. But that's some of the things that are being done and can, and in my opinion, should be done to address this issue in the long term. Yes.
Thank you.
Right. First of all, you guys are great presenters, and I think you guys have a really great foundation for a really strong research project. But like, I'm just one person, but this is just my opinion. But I feel like when I was reading your research, it focused a lot on science translation and like evidence-based dissemination. Just an example from your written, you stated like one of the root causes of vaccine hesitancy is a lack of public trust in science and government. Am I saying that? But in your research, like, I'm just wondering how come you guys didn't also include people who don't get vaccinated because they simply just don't trust science, or they believe in conspiracy theories, or their religion is against vaccination. Because I think it's been clear, like with COVID-19, no matter how much stats, no matter how much evidence you show, there will always be like a group of people who just won't listen to public health, what the WHO says.
Yeah.
Oh, I can start it.
I did see your stakeholders did add like a little section. I'm just wondering. Yeah.
So we did take an intentional effort to interview individuals that were vaccine hesitant and not take the vaccine. For example, 2 of the parents, which I interviewed personally, did not have their kids vaccinated for varying reasons. I don't want to violate their anonymity, but basically they had concerns with the origins of the vaccine and the long-term effects of the vaccine. So we did make an intentional effort to kind of reach out to those individuals that were vaccine hesitant. It was a bit tough to, I acknowledge that this is one of the limitations of having an online survey, is that we can't specifically target vaccine hesitant populations, although our survey did get a lot of responses from vaccine hesitant individuals. Some of the quotes or the open-ended comments that they offered are very, very.
One of the platforms we put the survey on was Reddit. So obviously you can imagine you get quite the diverse set of, and like conspiracy people talking about that stuff in their responses. So I do think we did have research from them, but I agree that we could acknowledge maybe more how that subset of group you could try reaching them.
Yeah, I'm just asking because when I looked at your solutions, it was very focused on like evidence-based practice, like how can we get more education out? And I don't know if that'll.
That's as far as when we mentioned the distribution of evidence-based practice and like educational programs and communication programs, it's not with the aim of trying to impose a top-down view onto the individuals that are involved in the system, the currently people that are hesitant in the system. It's more about using evidence-based practice to meet them where they're at, almost in sort of kind of like a harm reduction type mentality. So not trying to impose our top. I acknowledge you're completely right. Like there's some people that no matter what Bonnie Henry says, no matter what the government says, they will never want to get vaccinated. Like that's their positionality is deeply entrenched. But we believe that it's possible through, and again, it's a long-term process, it's a difficult process, but it's possible through interventions which foster trust, meet people where they're at, approach them directly and discuss their concerns directly, treat them with respect within the system. It's possible to not maybe convert all of them or allow all of them to get vaccinated, but kind of start bridging the gaps and hopefully address the issues that exist there. So I acknowledge that for sure our approaches and solutions do have plenty of limitations, but we do believe in the long term that to sustainably address this issue, this is one of the best approaches.
And just to quickly add, I think like if we're addressing just mistrust in general, that's even if there's people who never will, like they are not getting vaccinated and that's their positionality, that's okay. But I think also if we are working on rebuilding trust in these institutions, then that can extend beyond just like vaccination. Like that could then, even then if their doctor makes a recommendation, they might be more likely to follow it. So I think it kind of extends beyond just vaccination because it's a much broader issue.
Any final questions?
I don't have any questions, but I want to thank you for went very well thought out and very well written, and the presentation was also very clear.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you to our second team for that round of presentation. That was really interesting research into vaccines and hesitancy, which I think is extremely relevant given our circumstances lately in the world. So that concludes our round of student presentations for this evening. Thank you to both teams for sharing your research with us on two very important and informative topics today. I would be interested in continuing some of these discussions further, as I'm sure some of the audience would too. We're now going to have a 15-minute break for everyone to get some food. We have some really tasty Indian food along the back table there with signage in front for each dish. Everything is vegetarian. I'd like to invite the judges panel to help themselves first, as we will then make our way into the policy lab to continue our deliberation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. What a great round of presentations we just had. I'd like to now introduce our speaker for this evening, someone who has been involved with CCEL in the past, as well as map the system as a participant and educator. We are grateful to have him join us today. Akash works in the consulting industry using data-driven decisions to create measurable impact for his clients. Using storytelling, he drives compelling narratives and generates business insights that drive value for financial services and energy sector-related clients. With a continuous learning mindset, he is always learning about emerging technologies and works on projects with a focus on enterprise technology, digital transformation, and decarbonization. Akash has an engineering degree from UBC Vancouver and is also the co-president of the Vancouver Professional Chapter of Engineers Without Borders Canada. Please give a warm welcome to him.
Hi, everyone. I actually walked in here and then I saw my name. I was like picking up my name tag and it said like guest speaker next to it. And I was like, man, I have not been in front of an audience, I would say like since 2020. It's been a while. So I started questioning if I should have prepared more. But no, I'm very happy to be here, happy to be back. Yeah, and I mean, before I go into it, I just want to say kudos to both the teams. I think your research was very comprehensive, very thorough. The effort you put in was very evidently coming out. I actually had a lot of questions, but it's okay. Can connect with you all again. And no, I really also like the boundaries of your systems, just how focused it was to like the university setting and like people in medicine. I found that very like insightful. But yeah, so I know both teams are like really anticipating the results, so I'll try to keep it very like lighthearted and just tell you all a story. So I'm from a small town in India. And I remember my mom told me one time that I've always taken with me is like, just told me to like always like challenge yourself and try to like get out of your comfort zone. And that's what I've always tried to do. And yeah, and I lived in that small town for a while, but then after, I think it was my 9th grade that I decided like, okay, it's time to, I guess, like branch out and like see like what's out there. So I switched to an international boarding school. It was at the border of India and Nepal, in the foothills of the Himalayas. And that was the first time I was sort of exposed to this diverse setting. I met from people from like various cultures, diverse backgrounds from different like countries. And yeah, like there's power in their stories, power in their experiences. And like, I really liked like just being friends with them, listening to them. And I felt like that's the position I thrive in, is just learning from people and their experiences. And after I graduated high school, I wanted to be in a similar sort of a setting, and UBC Vancouver was actually one of my top choices. And I got in, I was pretty happy. And then first year happened in engineering. Yeah, first year engineering, tough. Yeah, I guess I was a mess. I think I'm still a mess. Kathy, one of the judges, can validate that. We both were in first year together. But yeah, I think over time, I sort of found a good network of friends, found a good support system. And I started volunteering with Engineers Without Borders in my second year. And that was very important to me because I had always volunteered back home. And when I started volunteering for Engineers Without Borders, it was good because it was a lot of engineering students coming together with a similar mindset of like advocating for social justice and advocating for like sustainable development goals, and like just like people who are like really like passionate about like social issues and having conversation and driving narratives around it. And there were also a lot of like projects to be involved in. So that was pretty good. And while I was in Engineers Without Borders, we got approached by CCEL because CCEL is, you know, always in contact with clubs and community-based organizations. And the community engagement coordinator, I think at that time, her name was Ola. She reached out to us and she was like, hey, we really like what you're doing. You should maybe potentially check out this opportunity with Map the System. And yeah, and that's literally how I got involved with Map the System. We got a team together of 5 engineering students from different faculties, but still engineering students. And then we came across a topic of single-use plastic at that time back in 2018. And specifically, we wanted to go a level deeper, and we chose to do our project on microplastics. And we defined the boundary of our problem, microplastics, specific to the Great Lakes. And since we were all engineering students, right, we were very solutions focused, right? So like you give me a problem, I'm not even thinking about the problem. I'm thinking, how do I fix this? And my first meeting with, I remember first meeting with Ola, we all went in, we were like, we have decided to make a device to clean out all the microplastics from the ocean. And she was like, what? And she was like, okay, let's take a few steps back, right? Like, let's honestly, like, let's just tell you what this competition is all about. It's not about solutions, right? Like, so yeah, so we actually went through a session, and that was very important. That's what we learned about, okay, like, this is where the problem landscape lies, right? And then there's like a bridge, which is like, okay, your gaps and levers. And then on the other side, you have your solutions landscape. And after we used that framework and applied that to our research, we were sort of like, oh, wow. Every solution that we thought of to applying to this complex problem, like they all just fell apart, right? Like just mapping out the stakeholders, how they interacted with each other, how one stakeholder impacted the other stakeholder, just like understanding the complexity of the problem, we were just mind blown. And then our focus just went straight away to like unlearning, relearning, and like teaching our community about it. And yeah, and we got the support from like good like mentorship and support from CCEL, and we came and we actually won the UBC. Like I was here standing giving, we won our UBC competition. And then we went to Toronto for the national finals, and we lost there. which is fine, but we still got a lot of feedback. Our systems thinking, they said our systems thinking was a little off, some feedback for both the teams, because we were not thorough enough in understanding, because Great Lakes it embodies like US and Canada. So it's a bilateral problem. And then we didn't talk about how, if Canada does everything right, but if US is still dumping plastics in the lakes, like how does that impact? And that's something we did not cover. And that's a very valuable feedback, right? Like, yeah, that's okay. But one thing I did like make it a goal in my sort of like my, after we lost was like, how do I not let this, this research that I wrote, this paper to just not be in my laptop now, like, is this it? Like, that's what something I was questioning. Like, no, this is not it. Like, how do I take my like learnings from here and like, what do I do with it? Like, and that was the thought process that I had. And right after I finished Map the System that summer in 2018, I went on co-op. In my third year, I went on co-op. I did 2 engineering co-op work terms. They were very engineering sort of like focused. And after doing my co-op, I was very happy because I realized what I don't want to do is, and that's good, right? Like life is all about like trying something out, see if you like it or not. And like, yeah, so I realized a very engineering focused job was something that was not for me. I like to understand the technical side of things, but I like to be on the high level. I don't like to get into the details of things. So that's something I realized that was pretty good. And I also came back in my final year as one of the center's community engagement coordinator as a workland student. I think the job posting just went live. I saw that the same position being hired for, yeah. So, and I actually came back and I planned Map the System for that year. Basically the team with, I forgot her name, I just said her name. So basically last year's team, I did the planning of Map the Systems for them. Yeah, and that was, again, a very good experience because I was able to take my learnings about this, okay, like, how do I take a step back and actually try to like understand the problem, right? Map out the stakeholders and all that stuff. I turned that into a workshop and I mentored kids basically that year in 2020 that were taking part in Map the System. So again, it was a very good experience. I felt like, okay, I did take my learnings from Map the System and I'm still using it in my current job. That was very good. And also in my final year, I also realized that, okay, it's now time to find sort of like a full-time job. Like, what should I be doing? And I came across consulting and I had no idea what it is. Like literally, like I was like, okay, I'm just trying it out, right? So I started talking to people in the industry and I was lucky, I was fortunate enough. I had a group of like-minded friends too who are trying to get into consulting. And yeah, I actually got into Deloitte. And I feel I mostly work with financial services, healthcare, and energy-related clients. And what's very interesting about my job is that right now I'm doing 3 things on my current project. I have to do a current state assessment on the problem that my client is going through. Basically, I spent the last week interviewing all the stakeholders in my client and just helping them understand the problem. Some of the times your clients don't even know what the problem is. So we interview them, we talk to the stakeholders, and then we outline the problem back for them. So again, right, like the problems landscape side of things, like directly like related to the current state assessment that I'm doing. And the second part of my deliverable is doing a gap analysis report. It's like, okay, this is the current state. These are the issues that's happening in your organization or like project and whatnot. How can we bridge these gaps? Right? Like, what can we do to take you from this current state to this future state and like bridge that gap? So that's a gap analysis report. And final thing that I have to do is do a full-on recommendation and implementation strategy, which is again, right? Like what you talked about, like what are the levers of change? What do they need to do to make you go from your point A to point B, right? So as you can see, right, like Map the System has truly been like one of the best, I would say, like experiences in my university like career. And some of the learnings that I took from here, I'm definitely still applying it. And the framework that you learn here is very valuable. And you want to see yourself doing that in your life. So I guess like without taking further time, like I'd like to just sum everything up. I just would say like I would like to challenge both the teams to like just question yourself, like, okay, so what's next for your research, right? Like how can you take your research to the next level, or what is the next big thing, or what is next for you, or how you're gonna take your learnings from Map the System and basically incorporate it in your future or daily life. Yeah, so with that question, that was my speech. Yeah, thank you for your time. Yeah, good luck to both the teams. Yeah.
I think we can get back into it now. Thank you. A very big thank you to our guest speaker, Akash, for being here. Again, really enjoyed your speech. So it looks like the judges are back and ready to announce the results for today. We're going to hear from Yusuf on the results of the panel's deliberation.
Hi, everybody. Apologies if I have tamarind sauce on my face. I just haven't taken this off all day. I just want to, I think on behalf of the judges, we went into the other room. We had a really good conversation, full agreement that there was an amazing amount of effort, amazing amount of kind of dedication shone through from not just presentations that were done here tonight, but also the written components. So for anyone who's only seen the presentations and didn't get to see the written components, I bet you wish you could. So they were pretty good in terms of being able to sit here and listen to presentations. It just gave us that much more depth to really understand subjects that admittedly none of us are experts in. So thank you again to all of you. We had a great conversation for another reason. I think it's also because this event is something that's happening tonight is only one part of a global competition, but that competition itself isn't about, you know, finding a solution, winning a prize. It's actually about getting your ideas out there, understanding, bringing people together, understanding the solution landscape, getting something to a point where you could actually move it forward, whether it's within the competition or in another space. There's no end of grant opportunities on campus. There's collective impact team funding and kind of support, resource support on campus and off campus as well. So don't see this as the end of anyone's journey, whether you're watching or competing tonight. So I do want to start by thanking the second place team. This is the climate focused team. We would really like to acknowledge how wonderful your project was. As I said, this isn't the first year of Map the System. This is a competition that's been going for many years. And I got to say this, it's a rarity that we have two projects that are formed the way they are. And we would be proud of seeing go forward and make change in the world beyond whether it's competition or elsewhere. Want to thank you for first and foremost addressing such a critical, important topic at a time like this. So thank you to all of you. No matter where you go with this work, and I'm sure you will because it deserves it. Just know that the way you put yourself forward, I think everyone in the judges' room really felt your personality come through. I don't know if you planned that or if that's just who you are, but it really came through. You had great pace. Your humility. I mean, you really presented your ideas in a way that made us feel like they were honestly coming from somewhere deep within you. You were frank in the way you were presenting and addressing questions. And I think that's really admirable and hope it wasn't just something you geared up for tonight. I think that's gonna be something that will take your ideas and your work far. You also acknowledge the limits of your work in a very real way. That's something that the judges felt was quite strong in how you responded to the questions. A couple of key areas, I think, just to put out there where we might want to focus or kind of grow the work would be some of the maps and visuals were landing differently for different judges, just in terms of the judge room conversation.
the clarity of them and understanding of them, they were quite complex, right? So that's one aspect of it. Another challenge would be, I think, along the lines of what questions were raised around survey methods. So again, it was a little bit mysterious, and that's not to say it wasn't done right. It just came across in a very mysterious way. So it would take somebody who's watching or listening probably more than one listen or one read to really get to the value of that data and truly understand where it's coming from. And again, I think one of the challenges and one of the differences, defining differences between these two projects was the scope. It really was a focused project. It was a great example of systems research. It was quite focused. And some of the stakeholders, for example, as questions were brought up, weren't as broad or the acknowledgement of connections to a broader system weren't necessarily as clear for others. That, I hope, is helpful feedback and not in the way to detract from what was otherwise, I think, a really strong and well-delivered presentation. So thank you again. And I'll ask the judges, is there any other ways you'd like to put that, or any other tips or feedback or compliments you'd like to share there? No? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. And of course, there's no mystery given that there's two teams. In other years, yeah, we would have a drum roll and everything else, but I want to offer big congratulations and thanks to the folks looking at vaccine hesitancy. So right off the top, thank you. Again, another student team, and I know you weren't your full team today, so congratulations to the two of you, but please extend it to the rest of your team. We felt that it was a strong presentation. It had very clear graphics. The subject matter, I think, as complex as it was, I think was offered in terms of a system. The description and the diagrams, the presentation of the entirety of the system was easy to grasp for those that aren't necessarily steeped in it. So thank you for presenting it in that way. There were some challenges, and I'll just be frank about those too. I don't know if others in the room felt similarly, but in the judges' room, we felt that there were definitely some challenges keeping up. There were some words that we don't use every day, and so when they're delivered quite fast or almost with a confidence that that comes from someone who really lives and breathes that every day, sometimes it's difficult to keep up. So there's also, I think we have a bit of a wonderful opportunity with a past Map the System winner here who gave us a tip about some of the graphics that were used within the presentation, and the challenge that, and correct me if I don't put this idea across properly, but it seems that Map the System seems to reward presentations that show up with originality year in, year out. So if there's a template for a presentation or a similarity in diagrams or illustrations, they don't often get looked at in a rewarding way if they show up looking similar 2 years in a row, for example. So maybe to go back, I think with the advice of someone who's been there, to go back and look at what's been presented and make sure you show up with something that kind of pushes the boundary a little bit in that regard. Does that offer the advice that you're looking to get across? Yeah, great. Yeah, so, but I think what was clear is that, again, it is an important issue. It's something that we've been talking about. It's something, as we all know, we're all wearing masks here tonight. We're not out of the woods yet. So it will be a topic of conversation for a while to come. It's a presentation that was at a great stage of development, and feel that with a confidence and with a bit of refining, I think you'll go on to really represent UBC well, both at the nationals and if all goes well at the globals again. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you, Yusuf. I think you captured a lot of what I was going to say about, Map the System being, it's not the beginning or the end of the work that goes into researching and understanding complex social and environmental issues. Can serve as a launching pad The problems we face today in our society are complex, but very much connected. They won't be solved in a day or through one policy or one paper, but through a nuanced, deconstructed understanding of them, starting with the work both our student teams have done the last few weeks. This competition is but one of many student avenues that we can take to mobilize research into awareness and action. And like Yusuf said, the work doesn't stop here. Our center can advise how to move your project forward, whether that's applying for our grants or connecting you with faculty support, or community partners. Both the teams today have started important work through your submission, and we want to support it moving forward. Now, before we officially end, I'd like to share some actionable pathways for our participants today offered from our center. We currently continue to run our volunteer matching program over the spring and summer, with opportunities coming on a rolling basis from our community partners across the Lower Mainland. We also have some social impact lab events happening through the next few weeks and into June. If you look up here, the Cool Hood Champs series is going to be happening on UBC and virtually, as well as the Hastings Community Center. If you'd like to find out more, you can follow us at CCEL on our Instagram page. I hope all of you enjoyed today's event as much as I did, and would like to thank everyone for their time. Thank you to the judges for being here today and providing your insights. And thank you to both our student teams for your effort and commitment across this project. Thank you and have a great long weekend.